Good morning, and thank you so much for joining me for our daily Coffee with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Webster. You know what I like to do on the show. I want to enlighten, inspire, and empower you to become your best self. Now, the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. And today, we want to get you fired up about contemporary hermit life and modern day solitary living, if you will. I know, such an interesting topic. My guest today is author Karen Fredette, and she has written the book Hermits, Dangerous Loners or Serious Spiritual Persons. Now, I can't wait to be able to talk to her more about that. Well, first, let me tell you a little bit more about Karen. She was born 1 week after Pearl Harbor, that's December 15th, 1941, in Akron, Ohio, into a Roman Catholic family. She attended 12 years of Catholic schooling and then joined a contemporary monastery at the age of 17. She spent about 30 or so years in a challenging and enriching years in which she wrote the biography of St. Clare of Assisi, and the companion of St. Francis and foundress of their Order of 1212. Now, when asked, she was also given permission to live a more solitary life as a hermit. And in 1989, she moved to an abandoned cabin with no rent, I know, in West Virginia for about the next 6 years. During that time, she wrote and published a memoir, Where God Begins to Be, A Woman's Journey into Solitude. She also acquired a dear companion, a fluffy white tomcat that she so lovingly named. Now, in order to support herself, because she says, and I love her sense of humor, even hermits need to eat, she cleaned houses and worked as a parish secretary for 1 day a week. Now, she was blessed to have an anonymous donor who donated $300 a month towards her living expenses. And during those years that she worked in the rectory, she also developed a deepening relationship with Pastor Father Paul Fredette as well. Now, in 1995, she moved to the Smoky Mountains near Hot Springs, North Carolina, and Father Paul, and she stayed in touch. And after about 7 years of discovering how much they had in common, they were married in 1996. In 1997, they were asked to take over a small newsletter for hermits, Ravens-Bread Food for Those in Solitude, which has become the main focus of their rather reclusive life on Trust Mountain. Now, where God is ever found, from a woman's autumn journey, which he also co-authored with Paul. Now, I know, that's a lot to take in, but I think it helps you understand a little bit about her relationship, her personality, and the perspective of which we're talking today. So you know what I'm about to say. Go on, get comfy, get cozy, because we are about to get started. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining me, Karen. I appreciate you being on today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity.
Now, I love it. With all that you have shared with us, I love your personality. I love the fact that you don't mind being in the place of solitude. I believe that solitude definitely has its place. It allows us to recharge, to get rid of all the hustle and bustle and the chaos that can be caused behind that. So I love that. Did you find that as a young person that you also like to have time to yourself?
I think I did, but for anybody who's interested in living more permanently as solitary or hermit, it's really a second half of life calling. You need a great deal of experience under your belt before you can truly embrace a life of solitude that is rich and leads you deeper into the sense of the holy.
So you're saying that this is more than just you want to take a weekend away from everyone and just fall off the face of the earth for 2 or 3 days. You're talking more so about choosing to really and truly live a solitary life that is not around the multitudes of people in your community.
Yes. And
I love it.
And this was fallen out of Western Christianity for quite some time. But in the 1950s, this vocation to solitude began to crop up again. And it has continued to increase. More and more people are finding that this is the way for them.
Yes, I know many people that have decided to live a more solitary life, and they are happy people, and I can see the difference just in their emotional stability, in their ability to interact with others. It has brought a sense of peace and joy, and I would love to talk to you more about it, but I agree with you with the being ready for the spiritual adventure that you will go on when you live a more solitary life. I love that. Now, when we talk about your being an author, is that something that you knew that you wanted to do perhaps as a young adult, or have you found that the idea kind of grew on you?
I always knew I was a writer, especially even in grade school. And I had the opportunity to do some writing while I was living in the monastery. As you mentioned, I had done research on the founders of our community, St. Clare of Assisi. And it took me 10 years to write that book because I could not work on it in the evenings because it was great silence, and I could not use a typewriter. So about half of the book was handwritten before I had an opportunity to type it up. So it was a challenge to my perseverance.
Well, I am so glad that you did persevere and you were able to bring it and share with the rest of us. Now, why do you think you became interested in the hermit lifestyle?
That was a development that came over me slowly. I was almost 30 years in the monastery, and contrary to what many people think, you're not alone in a monastery. There are people, other nuns, around you all the time. You pray with them, you work with them, you eat with them, you play and recreate with them. So you don't have much solitude. And I began to feel that in order to grow deeper into the prayer life that was calling me, I needed to be where no one else could observe me or pay attention to what I was doing and not distract me from the deeper calls within me.
Well, I just love how you understood that part of yourself and you were self-aware enough to know that that's what needed to happen. And I wonder if other people are so in tune with themselves that they know, what the next step should be in order for them to achieve their best self. And we talk about, living your best life, but knowing that this is the next thing that needs to happen. I think that's awesome. Now, your personal experience with choosing to live a more hermit lifestyle, more solitary lifestyle. How was the transition time for you? Not only what did you do to transition, but once you were alone, how did you take to being alone?
I'm glad you asked that question because it was a very curious experience. The world had changed a fair amount during the years I was in the monastery. You know, even the supermarkets were entirely different from what I had grown up with. And I had not been shopping. I learned to drive. I had to learn to, take care of money in the bank. And furthermore, having entered the monastery at 17, I had, in one sense, cut off my growth as a young woman. Mm-hmm. I moved into another form of deeply spiritual growth, which I never regretted. It is one of the foundations of my life now. But when I moved into this little cabin in West Virginia, something within me took me back to the 17-year-old girl I had been. And I did a lot of personal growth just within myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You really said a mouthful there, and I don't think that people realize that when you do make such a major decision at 17, you're right. You went from, in a way, being the responsibility of your parents to being in the monastery where you may not have had to make the same decisions day to day in your 20s that someone else in their 20s would have had to make. That's very true. Wow, that's like like an epiphany moment for a lot of folks. Like, oh yeah, that's so true. I love it.
Well, there was it took me a while to even realize what was happening. Within ourselves, images come and go. And I was back in the home where I had grown up in my mind. And, I finally realized what I was doing was making the necessary changes within myself that my age required. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one reason why when people talk to us, my husband Paul and I, about their interest in hermit life, we always caution them that you have to have a good deal of inner maturity. That's why we call it a second half of life experience.
I have to agree with you on that. We do have to know ourselves and be prepared for that. I love it. Well, it is almost time for us to go to break, but before we do, can you please remind everyone, Karen, what is the title of your book, where can we get a copy, and how do we stay in contact with you?
All right. The book that my husband and I co-wrote is called Consider the Ravens on Contemporary Hermit Life, and it's basically a handbook on living as a hermit, things that we learned from the hermits that have been in touch with us over the last 24 years. It's available through Amazon. It's available through Barnes & Noble. And you can get in touch with us at our email address, which is pkfredette, Fredette, at frontier.com. We have a website called ravens-bread-ministries.com.
Alrighty, listeners, now you know where you can pick up a copy of the book. We'll be back right after this.
Discovery. No, just a sec.
What would it look like if we listened more? Could the right voice, the right set of words, bring us all just a little closer? Get us to open up, even push us further? It could, if we took the time to listen. The most inspiring minds, the most compelling stories. Download Audible and listen for a change.
Hi everyone, Dr. Angela here. Did you know that Daily Spark is now on Facebook? That's right, you can visit with me at facebook.com/Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I want to know more about what you're thinking. I'd love to know, which interview did you find the most entertaining or the most informative? I want to talk to you, and I want you to be able to talk to me. Simply visit facebook.com/Daily Spark with Dr. Angela.
And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. My guest today is Fredette, and we are talking to her about her book, Consider the Ravens on Contemporary Hermit Life. That's right, we're talking about hermits, dangerous loners, or seriously spiritual persons. And I love it. I know a lot of folks that choose to live a more solitary life, and I know that it works for them. Perhaps this is something for you as well. So, Karen, my next question to you is this. Why do you feel the need to launch your ministry to hermits with a quarterly newsletter? I believe it's ravens-bread food for those in solitary. Why did you feel it was important to include the newsletter as a part of your ministry?
A Dominican priest had initiated this newsletter. When he wasn't able to continue it, Paul and I were contacted. Paul had experience as a magazine editor. I was a writer. It seemed a good fit. And we enlarged the newsletter. We had about 200 readers at the time. It went out postal mail. We now have about 1,150 readers around the world, mostly in the English-speaking world. People can get it by contacting us through our website or email. And one of the things about the newsletter that we've been very careful is that we wanted the newsletter to be written by the readers themselves. We wanted it to be an exchange of one reader saying to another, this is a problem for me. Does anybody else experience this? Or, I discovered something wonderful. I want to share it. So our newsletter is meant to be a shared experience among the readers.
I love that. You know, I don't think that people understand the importance of a newsletter. It really and truly does keep you in the loop. I'm one of those people that, sure, I love getting emails, but I also love having that tangible product, be it that it's a traditional newsletter or even books. You know, I love being able to read it on my phone during a layover. But at home, I like to be able to snuggle down with a really good book and turn the pages myself. So I'm glad that you're doing it like that. Now, what was your purpose, or what did you feel was the overall calling or purpose in writing your book, Consider the Ravens on Contemporary Hermit Life?
I believe that a lot of people had a rather skewed idea of what hermits are. Many of them, many of them thought they were more like a recluse who saw nobody, talked with nobody, was totally out of sight. Whereas traditional hermits, although they lived alone most of the time, were available when needed. Back in the Middle Ages, they would help with bringing the crops for their neighbors. In these days, many of them will have like one day a week where they will be doing some sort of compassionate work for meals on wheels or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And we felt people, who have even attempted the life, needed to know more fully what it was about. And that was our purpose in sending out the newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
People can come, there are pitfalls that can be avoided if you know that they're there. And you also get the encouragement of knowing that there are other people out there like you who have the same ideals.
Mhm. Mhm. And that's something else that I wanted to ask you, and I'm glad you talked about that there are other people out there like you. Do you have a rough estimate how many people are living in solitude or living a more hermit lifestyle here in the U.S.? Do you know?
No, I don't. I was afraid you would ask that question. We know how many subscribe to the newsletter.
Okay.
But
Mm-hmm.
I'm very sure that there are more people than those that subscribe to the newsletter.
Right.
But at
least
present, we have about, like I said, 1,150 readers, where we keep their names. It's always promised to everyone that their names will never be given out. It's so that they can maintain their sense of solitude, even in the newsletter.
Absolutely. And I think that people appreciate the fact that you aren't selling their information in a time where our information is just so freely, shared on the open marketplace, so to speak. I'm sure that they appreciate the fact that you're not doing that. Now, why do you feel that why you have switched to a very different format as far as regional fiction is concerned? Why was it important to do that?
Oh, that was a permission I had to give myself to write fiction. And I'm fascinated by the people who live and have been very, very secluded back here in the mountains of western North Carolina. When we moved here, they have a dialect that was, some of their words went back to Victorian England. They had Scots-Irish had come into these mountains in the 1600s, 1700s. And their story fascinated me. But I thought the best way to introduce this group of people was through fiction. Many of the people who live in our county, who would read the books, would recognize the county. But I don't give it that name. Everything is just slightly, shall we say, blurred, and also I just want, and I try to bring out the wonderful sense of neighborliness that there is in this county.
You're so right. As someone who was born on the East Coast, you find that each each state and has its own little personality and the things that endear you to that particular area. And I find that some of the places that people have either kind of forgotten about, they don't know about, or it's in that solitary living lifestyle. But there are some awesome people there, and if you ever have an opportunity to spend time, there isn't that hustle and bustle push to kind of get you in the door and out the door, to get you along your way. But instead, people kind of spend a little time with you, and you feel their sincerity. You hear it in their voice, and as you go along your way, you remember that, and you say, "Wow, what an awesome memory of having visited that place." You're so right with that. Now, I wanted to ask you a little bit about a part of a book in the series that you've written. Do you consider the Legend of Lavada Branch series less spiritual than you consider the Ravens to be, or would they be about the same?
I think they're almost equal. I wanted to show through Legend of Lavada Branch, the series. First one is called The Cove. Second one is called Panther Gap. I wanted to show the spirituality being lived out in a way of life that most people would be familiar with. What I'd also noticed, and I'm sure you have too, that there's a lot of people called millennials or X generation who have, when they are asked if they belong to a church or a certain denomination, they say no, none at all. And yet they are trying to live a very spiritual life. And I wanted to demonstrate that in writing in a way that would make it interesting for people to pick it up, read it, and say, yeah, that's where I really want to go.
And you really said a mouthful there, and you're right. The millennials that I either have in my life personally, or the ones that I interact with, and our Gen Zers as well, they are trying to shake off some of the religiosity of the world and have more of a spiritual basis. Now, I think that when I was a kid, that meant something totally different than what they mean by that. My interaction with them, and I think this is what you're saying as well, is that they want to have that very personal relationship with God that we talk about. They want to know that God is real, and how can I have him in my life, and what can I do? That it has to be more than just if I say a prayer at noon, or if I go to church on Sunday. What else can I do to make sure that God spends time with me? So I like that you are addressing the fact that there is that need there, and that they want to have a relationship with God the same way that we do. I love that. Now, unfortunately, the show is almost over, but I definitely want to give you an opportunity, Karen, to give us some words of wisdom. Is there a nugget that you would like to share with our listening audience today for anyone who might feel drawn to living a more solitary lifestyle?
All right. I'm going to read a page from the book, Consider the Ravens, and we'll conclude with part of a poem by Thomas Merton. Once hermits have been burnt by the nearness of the holy, they are scarred for life. No one will elect them as a national leader, nor shall they win any fame. The hermits of the future will be profoundly hidden from themselves as well as others. They will not measure their progress. It is utterly impossible to do so, since hermits dwell where there are no mileposts to mark the distance. If hermits read about mystical experiences, about the ladder of perfection, or the dark night of the soul, it is for pleasure in poetry, not to determine how holy they are. Thomas Merton dramatically describes the essential lostness and lowliness of the hermit vocation in his poem on St. John the Baptist. Quote, "Night is our diocese, and silence is our ministry. Poverty, our charity, and helplessness, our tongue-tied sermon. Beyond the scope of sight or sound, we dwell upon the air, seeking the world's gain in an unthinkable experience. We are exiles in the far end of solitude, living as listeners with hearts attending to the skies we cannot understand, waiting upon the first far drums of Christ the Conqueror, planted like sentinels upon the world's frontier."
I love it. And what a beautiful way to end our segment today. Thank you again, Karen Fredette, for being on with me today.
Thank you for asking me. It has been a pleasure.
I love it. And listeners, thank you for tuning in and spending some time with us today as well. As always, may the Lord continue to shine His face upon you. May you receive His grace and His mercy in all that you do. Until next time, everyone, be blessed in the Lord. Bye-bye.